We turn now to an inside look at the trial of former University of New Mexico Athletic Director Paul Krebs. He's charged with 2 counts of felony embezzlement stemming from allegations that he used public money to send himself, his family, and prospective donors to Scotland for a golf trip in 2015. Now, as we record this Thursday, the prosecution has rested. Krebs is on the witness stand and closing arguments will follow. Now, this week, senior producer Lou DiVizio sits down with Daniel Libet, an investigative and enterprise reporter for Sportico, who's been following the case. And as Mr. Libet explains, it's extremely uncommon for an athletic director to face criminal charges in a job-related scandal.
Daniel Libet, thank you for joining me here on New Mexico in Focus.
Great to be here.
I wanted to start with a quick summary of the accusations against former UNM athletic director Paul Krebs. We know that this is all tied to a 2015 golf trip, something that wouldn't be uncommon for university athletics departments or a bunch of boosters. But can you walk us through how prosecutors say that Krebs broke the law in this scenario?
Yeah, it's a bit esoteric, but we'll give it a shot here. So the allegation stems from the fact that Paul Krebs contracted with the university's travel agency, Anthony Travel, for a trip, put the university then on the hook for a $250,000 booster trip with the idea that this money was going to be largely recouped by having a bunch of boosters then pay for their freight to go to Scotland. When he was unable to do this, the allegation is that he then used money in the athletic department that was sort of set aside as a rainy day fund, the University of New Mexico being a public institution, the athletic department money therefore being public monies, and then used that money and moved it over to the Lobo Club, the outside nonprofit fundraising arm for the university, to sort of cover this gap in the expenditures for this trip. There wasn't enough money raised. It wasn't a matter of enough money raised. There wasn't enough people who he could get to go on this trip. And so he used public monies to cover the shortfall. And that is where all of these allegations originate. But then, of course, they expanded and then have since been scaled down to include things about how he behaved in the wake of this discovery when it was reported 2 years after the fact by KRQE that public money had been used to cover some of the costs associated with this trip. And now prosecutors have the judge and the prosecutors have dropped several of the charges. So the counts now are just about the money and the alleged misuse of public monies towards this trip.
In a story that you wrote just last week for Sportico, you pointed out how rare it is for university athletic directors to face criminal charges in a scandal like this, or really at all. Was there something different about this case that brought it to that level?
It's a great question. It's hard to say. I mean, not on the merits, probably. I could point to 100 athletic department scandals across the country in just the last decade that would seem to require greater accountability and maybe even criminal investigations that never went there. I mean, if we think about former Lobo coach Dave Bliss and the saga of him at Baylor with Patrick Dennehy, the former Lobo player who was killed. As far as I know, I mean, Bliss was never criminally charged. I don't believe he was even criminally investigated. So we're really looking, the only other example is the Sandusky sex abuse scandal at Penn State, where the athletic director who was presiding over the department at the time was brought up on criminal charges. Him and Krebs, in terms of the Division I, the major college sports landscape, kind of are in rare company over the last 3-4 decades of athletic directors who are criminally prosecuted for matters related to their work. So very rare. Why this happened at New Mexico probably had as much to do with the climate at the time as it had with the charges themselves. If we recall, we're talking 2015, 16, 17, the athletic department was not in good shape. There was the failed Wise Pies naming rights deal of the basketball arena. There were questions about the pit suites and whether or not they had been properly accounted or paid for. There was the criminal prosecution of a low-level men's basketball staffer named Cody Hopkins on embezzlement charges. That case is still pending. And so there was this aura of scandal and media scrutiny over the athletic department. And first the state auditor got involved in scrutinizing the finances, and then the Attorney General's office got involved. And whether or not Paul Krebs ultimately deserves to be convicted, a lot of the things that he had done in the wake of these investigations seemed suspicious. I mean, he was prone towards hiding things and trying to cover things. He created a fictitious story about how he reimbursed the university for the money, for some $25,000 that is alleged to have been misspent. He sought to delete emails so that reporters couldn't gain access from them through public records requests. So he might have brought more of this. He might have ultimately brought this prosecution on himself by some of his behavior in the aftermath of its discovery.
Now, you've been a leading voice for covering college athletics as a business for a long time, going back to your days with nmfishbowl.com. Do you think that there would be more public scrutiny of athletic directors like there is in this Krebs case if more sports journalists took that approach?
Yeah, I mean, this was sort of my rosebud. I was covering politics before I started blogging about the Lobos in 2016, and my whole ethos of it was let me kind of confront this athletics department within a unique kind of media scrutiny and really investigate it and see how not only what I find, but also how the athletic department responded. And Krebs was a subject that I wrote about quite frequently. He was, of course, the person in charge of the department at the time. And the reaction was telling, not just by him, but by others at UNM, by others in the state, other elected officials, in terms of how they responded to, in many cases, this source of great pride, seeing it scrutinized, seeing it getting kind of relentless media attention, and not of the kind that covers the games, but of the kind that covers the off-field events. And, I was not my reporting did not instigate this investigation. That was a credit goes to Larry Barker at KRQE. But clearly there was a way of reacting to media scrutiny that was problematic and troubling, and is a case study really for how transparency pays. And one could even dial back for Paul Krebs and recreate the scenario had he just issued a public mea culpa and said, I'm going to pay $25,000 out of my own pocket to reimburse this money because, this was my mistake, whether or not he would have been prosecuted and whether or not he would have even had to retire in the manner that he had done.
Now, the witness list in this specific case includes some household names around here anyways, including a former UNM president, a university CFO, and others. Now, we're recording this Wednesday. The trial's expected to wrap up maybe Friday. So some of those folks have already testified, and some will testify still in open court. Their former colleagues' freedom is really at stake. What does this all mean for the community, and what does it say about the business of college sports that you talk about in general?
I mean, to me, that's the issue. That's the elephant in the room that no one wants to address. When all of these issues were going on with the finances and the athletic department, people were looking for a scapegoat. People were looking for an individual who had sort of ruined this perfectly running operation. And of course, the operation has struggled. It has labored in this sort of no man's land of college athletics. It is a mid-major program that is striving financially to compete in an arena that it just cannot compete. And in many ways, what we have seen with the Scotland trip and the aftermath is a sort of microcosm or manifestation of that. I mean, this is really, in totality, much less about, how Paul Krebs as a administrator behaved. The larger story is about college sports and college sports at New Mexico and the relationship between college sports and higher ed. And so, I think the first couple of days of testimony, one almost got the sense when former boosters or current boosters took the stand to defend the validity of the trip, almost to extol the trip as a reason why they have committed, in some cases, millions of dollars towards the athletic department. It's possible that at least on the stand, this trip is going to be rehabilitated in the public image, to say nothing of whether or not Krebs is going to be found not guilty. But the larger story is still there, which is how institutions respond to public scrutiny and how they reconcile this very difficult conundrum of having a college athletic department, especially at an institution that is, not in the upper echelons of college sports.
Now, talking about how institutions deal with those problems and scrutiny, in your story you talk about what really is you see as a culture of secrecy inside many universities and athletic departments, and we've seen the consequences of that. You brought up the Sandusky case in Penn State, Nassar at Michigan State, but what mechanisms have universities and athletic departments in particular used to hide information, and why, from your perspective, do those justifications break down?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that they use are outside entities, so, the story is not just about the University of New Mexico, it's about the UNM Foundation and the Lobo Club, these two outside entities that really are there only to serve the university. I'm involved in this story myself. I have filed lawsuits, public records lawsuits, against the UNM Foundation and the Lobo Club for records that are directly related to the Scotland scandal and the Krebs prosecution. One of those cases, the UNM Foundation lawsuit, is currently before the Supreme Court. Oral arguments are scheduled, I believe, for September 11th. So, what I recognized early on in reporting on the Lobos, and as I've noticed in virtually every other institution of its kind, is this use of these outside entities to not only raise money for the institutions, but keep secret many of the records that pertain to the public business of a public university. And again, if not just as a asset and as a need for the public to be able to scrutinize the finances of its taxpayer-funded institutions, but for the institutions themselves to operate at the highest caliber. Transparency does pay, even though in the short term, it might seem to the individuals running these institutions, maybe it's better if we keep certain things secret.
When it comes to this specific case, should people expect it to be a precedent when it all ends? Do you think that seeing criminal charges for the first time will give universities like UNM more pause when using that keep it in-house mentality?
Possibly. I mean, it would be a nice thought. It doesn't seem to be the reflex. There's been plenty of other instances where universities should be recognized. And it's not just universities, it's just, our elected officials and our public servants should recognize a value and an ethic for transparency and ignore it. Again, all of these things theoretically sound good. And then there's an individual in the seat of scrutiny, and they have the decision whether or not to be the ones to potentially make their own jobs more difficult and give themselves headaches. And traditionally, it seems that they often decide, not I. And so we just repeat the cycle over and over again. I think certainly UNM, this is probably reverberating regardless of what the verdict is. But different circumstances will come along, and different individuals will have their own rationale for why they shouldn't be the ones to step forward and be open and transparent.